feels like an outsider at one point or another. Whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, the eccentric theater geek at your high school, or anything in between, I bet not one of us here feels like we fit perfectly into the communities we find ourselves in. The centurion in today's gospel reading is also an outsider. It's clear that he cares deeply for the community he is a part of and is deeply involved in seeing to the welfare of the people in Capernaum. But at the same time, his vocation and his ethnicity will always make him an outsider. I remember feeling like an outsider not too long ago when I moved to Chicago back in August. Not only did I move away from my home state of North Carolina for the very first time, but also from First Lutheran Church, a welcoming community that I've been a member of since I was 4 years old. I had left everything that was home, everything that was comforting, to come here to LSTC and finish my degree. The problem was that I was only going to be here for a year. What was the point of plugging into a community? Who would invest time in a stranger who was just passing through? I was an outsider looking in, not only at LSTC, but as I looked for my church home away from home. Thankfully, the LSTC community saw my desire to connect, to build relationships, not only at school, but with the church. And so I was invited by friends to Holy Trinity in the Blue, my second week here. I didn't know what to expect that first Saturday night, but when Pastor Craig said, no matter who you are, no matter who you love, no matter if you're here for the first time, or if you call this your church home, you are welcome here. In that moment, I had heard, whether you are part of the in crowd or if you feel like an outsider, whether you feel lost or if you feel right at home, you are welcome here. I cried. My church's welcoming statement starts much the same way. I turned to a friend sitting next to me, and I said, I found it. I found where I belong. When Jesus saw a community welcome an outsider, he was amazed.
Community stands at the heart of today's gospel, and it is deeply intertwined with faith. The centurion, of course, is an official of the Roman Empire. He knows what it means to have the authority to tell someone to do something, and they do it. But he also seems to recognize that Jesus has a similar but far greater authority when he says, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. It's a confession of faith that makes a claim about who Jesus is and from whom his authority comes. It's a tremendous confession of faith, but the centurion never says a word of it. Instead, it is mediated second hand and carried by others. Earlier in Luke's gospel, a man who is paralyzed is carried by his friends to Jesus to be healed. In another passage, a widow's son is being carried away when Jesus sees his mother, has compassion, and raises him to life. And in yet another story, parents are carrying their little children to Jesus so that he might bless them. The centurion's friends, too, carry his faith on his behalf. Over and over, people are being carried to Jesus by their community. To paraphrase the Beatles, they get by with a little help from their friends. The life of the church, too, is filled with carrying. we are very young, we are literally carried to the font to be baptized and welcomed into the community of faith. Every Sunday, too, we are swept up in that same community as we eat and drink at this table. And even when we recite the Nicene Creed in the liturgy, it's not I believe, but we believe. In a short story by Megan and Mayhew Bergman, the narrator spots a gospel choir that passes by her cottage every Sunday singing. The sight is enough to make her cry and yearn for their return every week. And so she says, all I needed of religion, I realized, was the beautiful sound of someone else's faith. When Jesus heard this faith that is vulnerable enough to be carried by the community, he was amazed.
The centurion's faith is a subversive act. James Marsters, a subversive actor and musician best known for playing the role of Spike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, describes an act of subversion as something that pushes back against the status quo. Subversion, he says, strips away the lies that are taught to us by society. Subversive acts break down those falsehoods and say, no, that's not how it has to be. The centurion's faith, carried by the community, strips away the idea that only God's chosen people, Israel, are capable of great faith. This Gentile's faith reflects belief in a God who also subverts boundaries and cares for all people. And so, through his friends, he explains that Jesus has the authority to heal his servant. Furthermore, Jesus' authority, which greatly outshines his own, is capable of doing so while simultaneously honoring Jewish purity laws. The centurion's faith in a subversive God is so great that faith and hospitality become intertwined, and a bridge is formed between ethnic groups. For the first time, this outsider truly belongs. Jesus also responds subversively. Jesus finds the centurion worthy because the centurion declares first that he is not. The centurion's faith alone, carried by the community, makes him worthy in Jesus' eyes. In the historical context of this text, healing miracles were expected to require direct, proximate contact between the healer and the one being healed. Inspired by the centurion's faith, Jesus chooses to subvert that custom and heals the centurion servant with God's gracious healing power, giving legitimacy to the centurion's faith and opening the community of believers up, not only to Israel, but to the Gentiles as well, subverting boundaries all along the way. As biblical scholar Gregory Anderson Love writes of this text, Luke portrays faith as situated within a community where God and others are embraced. When Jesus understood that God subverts all boundaries, even the one between Jews and Gentiles, he was amazed.
For the past 3 years since I've been at Holy Trinity, I have experienced what it means to be carried by the faith of a community that reimagines Christianity in expansive ways. Especially on days when I come here and I'm not personally feeling it, I have been able to come to this place to be communally carried by your faith. And so the story about the healing of the centurion's slave is a story about faith in community that happens to include a healing. It's a story about the kind of faith we strive to embody here at Holy Trinity. It's a communal faith that transcends boundaries because the one in whom we trust transcends boundaries. It's a faith that finds expression in our hospitality every week, and in our guiding principles. When we bear our faith in anti-racism work, and 2 Advents ago on the corner of Clark and Addison to declare that Black lives matter, we act with courage.
Every week when we say, whoever you are, wherever you're from, whomever you love or marry, you are welcome here. We are radically inclusive.
When the mission of Holy Trinity spans peoples from across Chicago, from Lakeview to the South Loop and beyond, we cultivate empowering relationships.
When a sliver of green space in our garden reminds us of the splendor of creation and our task to be good stewards of the natural world, we delight in God's beauty.
When we experience meaningful multi-sensory liturgy and are so renewed for our daily work among God's people, we engage with intention.
These guiding principles are rooted in the exemplar of faith Jesus holds up in today's gospel. He commends a faith held together by the community, a community that trusts in God's all-encompassing grace for the sake of the world.
When Jesus heard this, he was